I want to show our viewers the difference between American media coverage with the World Cup and other countries. Fox Sports reporter Jenny Taft, who has been quality in her career, especially when her former co-host Skip Bayless used body shaming as a tactic to take a shot at Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy. Well, Taft was sent to Qatar to cover the World Cup. She marveled at the stadium, spoke of how the fans are uber comfortable, and then tossed to this piece with this man, Hassan Al-Tawadi, Secretary General of the Supreme Committee. In the interview, Al-Tawadi, who Taft says was instrumental in bringing the World Cup to Qatar, thanks him for their beautiful set and throws softball after softball, with one question being, what can these fans expect to see from the Qatari people and from this culture? To which Al-Tawadi hypocritically answers, the world gets to see who we are, how welcoming we are. A welcoming is certainly not something many people were awarded, though on the flip side.
Ever since FIFA chose Qatar back in 2010, the smallest nation to have hosted football's greatest competition has faced some big questions. From accusations of corruption in the bidding process to the treatment of migrant workers who built the stadiums, where many lost their lives. Homosexuality is illegal here. Women's rights and freedom of expression are in the spotlight. Also, the decision 6 years ago to switch the World Cup from summer to winter. Against that backdrop, there's a tournament to be played, one that will be watched and enjoyed around the world. Stick to football, say FIFA. Well, we will, for a couple of minutes at least.
This is how the BBC opened their World Cup coverage from Qatar, with former Spurs striker Gary Lineker serving as host, which shows the strikingly different mood and presentations of the two. After all,
where you look at the right-wing political TV ads that ran repeatedly during the recent baseball playoffs, saying the games were marred by, quote, jarring interruptions from the most shockingly crude and arguably racist political ads since Willie Horton hit the small screen in 1988. Unquote. The anti-immigration ads were sponsored by a new group that calls itself Citizens for Sanity, linked to the America First legal foundation founded by former Trump advisor Stephen Miller.
That's right. During the MLB playoffs, Fox ran an openly racist ad whose characterization of immigrants as criminals almost exactly echoes Trump's line during his announcement of his presidential campaign in 2015 about Mexican immigrants. And of course, you remember what he had to say there. Notoriously, Miller was an architect of Trump's cruel and crude immigrant family separation policy, his Muslim ban, and his shutdown of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, which defers deportation for immigrants brought to the U.S. as minors by their parents and allows them to work, but requires regular renewals. FS1, or Fox Sports 1, is under the Fox conglomerate, as we know, which also falls under the umbrella of News Corp. The head of News Corp, you probably know, it's Rupert Murdoch. What else falls under News Corp's umbrella? Sky News, or Sky Sports, as many know of it in England and the UK, who has been accused of eroding democracy in the US and Australia by dividing people and undermining institutions with lies and populist right-wing ideology. For me, it is the polar opposites between Lineker and Jenny Taft, who, may I just say, well-respected journalist, well-respected reporter, been in sports for a long time, former college athlete. I do like her. This just comes with the territory of making a choice to cover it and be a good foot soldier or not cover it, mainly for the broadcaster of the World Cup, which is Fox Corp. Roger Bennett, one half of the Men in Blazers podcast, echoed these sentiments. When Taft interviewed Al-Tawadi, though, there were many opportunities lost, including allegations of corruption, specifically with Al-Tawadi, who allegedly offered bribes of $1.5 million to each of 3 FIFA voters from Africa back in 2010 when Sepp Blatter made that famed announcement.
The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
Whistleblower Phaedra Al-Majid has claimed for more than a decade she was in the room with Al-Tawadi at a hotel in Angola in January 2010 when money was offered to the three men, who were among 24 voters set to pick the 2018 and 2022 World Cup hosts later that year.
Over the years, top names associated with the world governing body have been named, shamed and suspended. In 2015, a dawn raid on a luxury hotel in Zurich saw several FIFA executives and associates indicted by the US Justice Department, resulting in charges of racketeering, wire fraud and money laundering. And then, in 2020, the US Justice Department alleged corruption was involved in Qatar's World Cup bid. It accused 3 FIFA executives of taking bribes to vote for the Gulf state to host the tournament. Ultimately, more than half of the 22 men who voted for Qatar were later accused of or charged with corruption.
Not long after the vote, allegations surfaced that some FIFA members had been bribed to vote for Qatar. Most of the allegations focused on prominent Qatari billionaire businessman Mohammed bin Hammam, then a FIFA board member, accused by the Sunday Times and others of giving cash and lavish gifts. There's no doubt about it that he's going around using a secret slush fund, paying football officials all over the place, Sunday Times reporter Jonathan Calvert told ABC News. The Sunday Times based a recent expose on a cache of millions of leaked documents surrounding the bidding. Al-Majid would tell a Fox News documentary on FIFA corruption the following: "We were talking about how Africa had been given its chance to host the World Cup and how the Arab world should be given their chance. And then Hassan offered Haïtou $1 million for his football federation, Cameroon, and in return, we wanted his vote. I remember there just being laughter, and then him saying that is not enough. And so the price was up to 2.3 million, just like that. It was just so simple. We will give you this money for your football federation. You give us your vote, and thank you so much." One by one, we did the same thing. $2.3 million was offered to each member that evening in exchange for their vote. It was verbal. I never saw money. Al-Majid later withdrew her claims. She made it crystal clear that she was being threatened and harassed for being a whistleblower. Now, these are all questions including how welcoming Qatar is to LGBTQ plus people, which we've gone over. They are not. And the conditions of migrant workers and the 6,500, which is likely an undercount, the allegation of 6,500 migrant workers losing their lives. So as I see it right now, the United States taking on Wales in one of the many stadiums, but not even just stadiums, the metro line, roads, what have you, etc., that were built. And Taft and Fox Sports could have posed any of these questions, and they chose not to. Broadcasters such as the BBC and Telemundo chose to highlight those concerns in their coverage of their first day of the tournament, where the hosts lost to Ecuador after a lavish opening ceremony that included contributions from Morgan Freeman and a member of BTS. In contrast, Fox heaped praise on everything from the air conditioning in the stadium to the variety of food available to the fans to the very welcoming Secretary General of Qatar's World Cup Committee, Al-Tawadi. A puff piece with Al-Tawadi followed, in which he was allowed to speak in glowing terms about the World Cup, with zero questions from interviewer Jenny Taft about concerns raised by journalists and human rights groups. MLS Buzz would tweet, "Look, Fox and every other broadcaster, you're not going to sell us on Qatar. You could chill out on the propaganda, just call the games." Speaking of transactional broadcasts, we then learned through Ben Strauss's reporting for the Washington Post that Fox reneged on sending a small crew to the host country. The strategy shifted after the deal with Qatar Airways was finalized. That agreement included comped flights to Qatar, said those people speaking on the conditions of anonymity to reveal private discussions. David Neal, executive producer of the FIFA World Cup and vice president of production for Fox, basically said they're only going to stick to sports and nothing more. For Fox, the strategy is identical to the way it handled the World Cup in Russia 4 years ago, but there is another dynamic at play in Qatar, that being, of course, Qatar Airways, the state-owned airline, which will serve as a major sponsor of the network's coverage, which means Fox's production in Qatar is essentially being underwritten by the Qatari government. In contrast, Telemundo, which owns the Spanish-language broadcast rights for the World Cup in the US, said it intended to take a stronger line than Fox. I do think we have to talk about the legacy we leave. By the time the tournament's over, we won't have been ignoring the geopolitical issues that might arise, said Telemundo Deportes president Ray Warren.